Welcome to the Forwardfoodtech podcast. Today we're going to be digging deep into the hot topic of carbon farming. Our guest is Daniel Baertschi. Daniel is an expert in the field of regenerative agriculture and works all over Europe, the US and Australia. He's passionate about farming and how we can make it the solution for climate change. Daniel's vision is a world where we live in harmony with nature and enjoy life in all its fullness. His mission is to help regenerate our agri-food system from farm to fork. Rob and Daniel discuss and challenge the real issues of how the carbon market can legitimately become a new source of income for farmers. But does carbon farming have a viable future? Listen to the podcast and find out.
Good morning, Daniel. How are you today?
Good morning, Rob. I'm fine, thank you. And thank you for the invitation. It's great to talk to you.
It's a pleasure. Daniel, tell us a bit about what you do.
Well, I'm a consultant. I have a background in agronomy, and I work with farmers, organizations, and companies that want to shift to regenerative agriculture. And mainly, I work in Switzerland, but also in Germany, in Eastern Europe, and I have some contacts to the US and Australia. So I try to add value to people that want to shift to regenerative agriculture. And often we have to start somewhere. And my goal is really to work with people along the way and help them really to discover what's the power of regenerative agriculture.
And that would go right down to being on the farm and deciding what crops are, or what level do you go down to?
Well, mostly I work on a systemic level, but also occasionally I work with farmers. And because I'm a trained farmer, I have a practical knowledge, and I try to connect also let's say people with different skills. So it's not only me, it's a group of people, and I'm president of an association for regenerative agriculture in Switzerland. And we connect basically people and farmers that have experience, and a lot of practical farmers, they have a lot of experience, and we try to help them to share their experience. So I'm more like a broker than just the expert.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you for explaining that to us. So I'm really interested in carbon farming, but I'm interested in it from an acquisitive perspective and its potential impact on the whole of agriculture in the world and the environmental benefits it could lead to. So I'm really want to know more about it, but I'm sure I'm not alone in this industry of trying to understand more about it. So first off, let's walk through this for me, just so I can really understand it at an initially very basic level. And let's just try and ask some simple practical questions. In the carbon trading market for carbon sequestration, first off, what is carbon? Is it CO2 or is it carbon? And that's my first question. And presently today, in January 2021, what is it worth per ton?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's worth? There is a price and there is a worth, and that's not often the similar thing. The price actually it's between 15 and 100 euro or Swiss francs. That's quite similar, or dollar. That's not far away. Per ton of carbon we put back in soil, and of course we take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and then it's processed through the plants through photosynthesis, and then the roots will exude that in the soil and just feed soil microbes. So in soil you have carbon, and I mean 1% is 1% more of organic matter is more than 10 tons of carbon per acre, or more than 20 tons of carbon per hectare we put back in soil, which of course is interesting, and also from a financial point of view it adds value to the bottom line. In a Swiss context where I work mostly, of course that's not a huge amount compared to the yields they generate per hectare, but it's an add-on, and it especially pays farmers that do more than just the normal things. So to build soil organic matter often is not well paid, and to pay farmers to put carbon back in soil will just add value to their work.
Are we measuring carbon per tons of carbon or carbon dioxide?
Yeah, I mean, you measure different things, and you know, right. We have this traditional soil testing in the lab, and that's something which, to my understanding, is still working. And in most schemes, they rely on soil testing in a lab, and then you just measure organic carbon in the sample. And I think that's not the most advanced technology. There is more advanced technology. There's satellite-based data where you can monitor how much carbon you have in soil. And if we are able to monitor that more exactly, then it's easier to sell it somehow on the market, and to pay farmers, and to have systems in place that are transparent, and let's say there is no a risk of reversing this back to the old state.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned testing because essentially carbon sequestration, as far as I understand, is at different depths of soil and also depending on different soil types. And so satellite data that is looking at soil from above, at the surface level. So, and if there are different depths, and I understand some analysis and testing is going down to a meter or different layers within that. So we're going to get different amounts of sequestration at different depths. So if we've got different crops that are doing different types of sequestration, obviously they've got different root structures. So that immediately says to me that there'll be different amounts of organic matter produced in different areas of the soil at different depths. How can we measure this affordably?
There are different standards around. There's one standard from FAO, there's another one in development from Vera. And because soil is so different from one area to the other, it's quite difficult to have one standard that fits every context. My personal view is that we need to have a more flexible approach and not only measuring soil carbon, but also just assessing what's the technology and what is the farm really doing on the ground. What are the crops, what's the rotation, what's the intercropping system, what's diversity and things like that. And I think today we have tools that can integrate different sets of data in one model, and then we can take this model and input different data from different areas and then find the best, let's say, best estimate. It's always an estimate, you're never perfect, but it's quite obvious that if you compare different farming systems, you have different, let's say, content of soil organic matter. And if we can combine the systems approach together with the analysis approach, then we have quite an accurate measurement, an accurate assessment of carbon content in soil. And of course, there is also risk if you go for no-till. There is more carbon in, let's say, in the topsoil and less carbon in the below soil. But if you have the right cropping system, then you still have the root system in place that brings carbon quite steep in soil. So I think a combination of different assessment and measurement tools would be the most appropriate thing to use. And of course, that gets to a certain complexity, but with digitalization, we are able to manage more data. And I think there are companies in many places that are working on that area now. It was quite an area which was underdeveloped for a certain time, but now we have a momentum because of climate change, where science and also research is catching up. And just recently, we have a research in Switzerland that if you have a more extensive cropping system, then you have more carbon in soil than in intensive systems. So less fertilizer means more carbon in soil, which is interesting. And of course, more organic fertilizer on soil and in soil also means more carbon in soil. So if we combine all this data in one set, one model, then we have quite accurate information about the real state.
I think you're absolutely right, and it's the totality of it is a benefit. I completely understand that. So back to if I was a carbon trading and I was a large corporate airline, for instance, and I'm looking to offset carbon, and I was in the carbon market, you said a price, I think it was about $20 a ton. And you also said that 1% increase in organic matter is about 25 tons a hectare or 10 tons an acre. What is the highest level of organic matter you've seen increase in 1 year on a farm?
Well, that's an interesting question. I have seen in one farm, it's more than 1% per year. That means more than 20 tons per hectare per year. And if we have $20, that's still only $400, which doesn't really, let's say, it's not the only motivation to do more for soil. So a farmer that wants to benefit from healthy soil will not only look at what do I get from carbon compensation, but what's the overall benefit. But still, I mean, you can reach 1%, and that requires that you have a very sophisticated, let's say, cropping system with a lot of organic matter you just leave in soil, because microbes, they just need organic matter, and if they don't have the food, they will not thrive. The goal is to have, let's say, 1.2, 1.3% per year. That usually a farmer can get to that level, but 1%, that's the elite. Let's put it that way.
So 1% is a lot from what I've heard, and realistically, even with a fairly progressive no-till farm that's using regenerative thinking, what would you say is the normal amount?
Yeah, it's 0.2, 0.1, 0.2.
Okay.
It really varies
All
a
right.
lot. If you have a really
Right.
poor soil in an area like Eastern Europe with a big farm, and you start with manure, with compost or biochar, and of course then you have a huge increase
Yeah.
in a short time. But in our soils in Switzerland, where we have about 2 to 3% on average, of course it's a harder thing to go to 5 to 6%. But still, I
So,
mean, it's possible to have good progress, and research is a little bit behind in my in my opinion. Research in
so
Switzerland tells us, well, it's only 0.6 or 600 kilograms per year, which is way out. Well, it's something, but it's nothing.
yes, I appreciate that. So let's just get the maths right then. On a good but average system, we're looking at, call it 0.2% increase in organic matter, and at $20 a ton. Just do the maths for me here. What would
Well,
I earn?
it's let's say it's $50 to $80 per hectare per year you can generate in a normal
True.
system if you have
Right.
this
Okay.
this amount of $20, which is paid by some US based organizations. In Switzerland we have
Okay.
a price of 100 Swiss francs for 1 ton, and of course that's more interesting if you have 200, 300 francs adding to the just an add-on without any effort, let's say. It's just something you can just get to,
So
you just do it better.
what you've talked about, which is I agree with, it's the total benefit of all of this type of farming to the crop yields, costs, and actually the environment. But a corporate business that is offsetting their carbon to a farm and paying out roughly $50 a year per hectare because of the increase in organic matter, which is we're accepting is on average pretty small, but but in totality it's a huge benefit. I'm not arguing with that. What happens in a year where there is an extreme weather scenario? And we certainly had that in the UK in the last 2 years. We've had the wettest winter, I believe, in history, and we had a pretty historically dry summer or spring, definitely. What happens in those situations? Because for what I understand, organic matter can diminish just purely by the weather pattern, not necessarily by the farming practices. What happens then to the farm when the farm's being paid to increase organic matter, but in fact in that year or years it doesn't, or even arguably it decreases? Is the farm then fined, or does the farm have to pay back that carbon credit if, in essence, that carbon has been released back into the atmosphere?
Well, we are still in a voluntary market where it's not regulated by governments, and I haven't seen yet a kind of a punishment system. It's just upfront will only be paid a certain amount, and the most contracts are over 5 or even 10 years, and if you have a longer period, then it's just the trend which is important. If you have 1 year where you have a problem really to sequester carbon and it goes back to the old state, that can be a temporary problem. But if you have a good system in place, that's only 1 or 2 years, and then we come back. And most schemes, they just pay the farm, let's say 80% upfront or 60% upfront, and the rest will just be paid if the measurement after 5 years is really at that level where we have projected it. And it's also important that consultants make projections based on reality and not on the best hope, and also to include some, let's say, setbacks because of weather, of drought, and things like that. But overall, if you have a longer period of time, that will always equal out. The most important is not to have kind of a bonus malus system, but to have a system that is motivating farmers to do it long term, not only short term, and to get back to have the money after 5 years and then to get back to the old state. That's not the goal. So more important than just paying farmers, also supporting farmers that they really adapt their system to a new stage, and they don't have the motivation to go back. And that's usually if you have better soil health, better soil fertility, you have less input costs, and at some point in time, after some years, you have a higher yield than before, which of course then is the game change. You don't have to pay farmers anymore for carbon sequestration. He will just benefit from a better return.
So much like the woodland schemes for carbon offsetting, there are buffers and there are leakages calculations in there. Okay, that's very good to hear. What happens if we roll this forward 10 years and a farm that's been paid to sequester carbon and this has been calculated accurately and they've been shown to improve their organic matter, And 10 years' time, they've gone from 1.8 to 2.7 or whatever it is increase. And they've had all the other additional benefits that you've just described that are to the farm by thinking in this way around the farming benefits regards productivity and cost savings. That farmer sells the farm or retires or whatever else it is. And then the farmer that comes on board next to take that land doesn't believe in any of those systems, and then farms it, frankly, in a way that it's about taking out of the soil, in the way that people have done for 70 years, pretty much around the planet in developed countries, have done that after thousands and thousands of years of soil being created. We've spent the piggy bank of organic matter in the last 70 years. Just imagine this in exactly the same situation that a farm that's been 10 years' time has been doing that, and somebody comes in and goes, great, rubs their hands and starts to milk the proverbially the soil, and the organic matter starts to go backwards, and of course, in essence, it's releasing carbon back into the atmosphere. I mean, I guess it's a similar question to climate extreme weather, but in that situation, it's more of a deliberate act of sabotage, almost on this whole system. What do you think about that, and what is the answer there? Because quite honestly, this is very likely to happen.
Yes, of course, and there is no simple answer to that, because it has to do with let's say, mentality of people and the value system of people. And I always tell people that if you don't have the right value system in place, then there is no guarantee that you will keep it this way for a longer period than you're paid. I mean, money is one important motivation, but I think it's important that we have a system that supports farmers long term. It's not consulting, it's more coaching. It's just working with them. And if they transition to another one, just helping them to find the right people just to continue. Then, of course, there's a certain room for government regulations. To be honest, I don't really like too much regulation. I was in the organic sector, and there is a lot of regulation which doesn't make sense. But I think there needs to be a certain consensus from the society or from government that, well, if we have better soil organic matter content, it's an overall benefit to society. So there should be kind of a system that links direct payments to farmers to soil organic matter content. And if you decrease your content, you will be punished by subsidy system and by the market. The second one is the market. We should work with retailers and with processors and traders that source more material from regenerative farms. And then, of course, if you have a decreasing soil organic matter, then you will have a problem with your supply chain, because the value of the food will be less. I think ultimately, if we have better soil, we have better food. And if companies like Nestle, like Danone, will pay farmers better for food from healthy soils, there is no motivation to go back to a lower soil organic matter content. And of course, you can't just put the policeman everywhere, but I think it should be a system that motivates good stewardship with land. And I think there is one part for the government and another part for the whole value chain and traders and processors to value that.
Yes, and but I'm still going to stick on this one because. When you've got a corporate, large corporate that are talking about that they're now carbon neutral or zero carbon, whatever words they want to use, because of this offsetting. And in fact, it is a volatile material that can be briefly offset and then released quite easily by malpractice or a system that is not consistent with your beliefs. The only way that this is seen as it is generally seen is almost like a blockchain or a digital ledger where carbon in can be carbon out, and the farm would then have to pay or have a penalty of some sort to use it. It may be the farm might see that cost benefit. Growing as a farmer myself for 30 years, there are times when you know that you're going to grow a crop that's going to take something out of the soil, but the goal is to rebalance that afterwards. Hence the reason why we use farm manure back into soils and other ways that you've already talked about to put the energy back into the soil, because you've taken it out. So it is a piggy bank of or a credit and debit account. Yeah. But my greatest concern is, as it is at the moment, we've got companies that are offsetting their carbon into this market with actually no way whatsoever of tracing that beyond fairly loose levels of aspirations. And I totally believe your determination to get it right and the values that you are referring to. If everybody was like you, Daniel, this wouldn't be a problem in the first place. And so We have to understand or even prepare ourselves for significant abuse. And I'll add to this, if I was a consumer of, say, there's a famous beer brand in the UK called Brewdog. Now, they are now saying they're carbon neutral or zero carbon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because they've invested in woodland particularly. So if a consumer starts to switch buying one beer to their beer because they believe that they're doing the right thing for the environment, and yet the system that is there is vulnerable to being abused. I'm not saying the woodland scheme in that particular example, but if for instance they'd use carbon trading into farming as an alternative to woodland schemes, then the consumer's been deceived there, and that I think, and actually, the UK's farming industry has made a public statement to be carbon zero by 2050, I believe. Okay. So that there's going to be an awful lot of work to be done there. But my point is still this: that it almost feels like it's call it the bank, but instead of dollars, it's tons of carbon. But we're not leaving the door locked. We're leaving the door open almost. And we're saying we're going to put all this money, that essentially, or this asset, or this currency of carbon into this bank, but we're not going to bother locking it up, and we're not going to bother making it secure. And actually, anybody in the middle of the night could walk in there and stuff their pockets and rucksacks with it and walk out with it. Now, that's not a very good bank.
Yes.
And so fundamentally, this has to change in a way that is going. Otherwise, actually, could undermine the whole of this, because it could make us be very vulnerable to the investor markets. That actually this is the famous story of emperor's clothes. That it's simply it's not a beautiful thing. It actually doesn't exist at all. So I call back to you, the practitioners, the people that are making this happen. Are my concerns valid, and what is the answer?
Oh, certainly that are concerns that are very valid, and from human behavior that humans don't always choose the best option. They choose the most convenient option to do something, and it only works if we have this whole system changed. To be honest, it doesn't work if we just pay farmers to sequester carbon and then we hope, well, the whole system will change. We have to find a whole system approach, not only from farm to fork, but from soil to gut. And I think it's really important that we combine agriculture policy with nutrition policy, and that we have, let's say, this feedback from the consumer side on the farmers. What do we really want to buy from you? What is really the need? And the need is much more vegetables and fruit, for example, and less cereals, for example. So we have to adjust the production pattern to the, let's say, healthy diet pattern. And then we have a much better production system. Will be kind of a let's say, also economical, the best way to produce food, and all other options should be less interesting. So the more ecosystem services based production system should be rewarded by the market. And only if we have a reward system directly from the market, then it will really be a transition that is stable and not reversible. But human behavior not always is easy to predict. But my hope, let's put it that way, my hope is that the youth that is now protesting for climate will just also understand that they can make a better choice with their food, with their foods they buy, and with the choices they make, just to buy food from regenerative farms. And there we also will have a need for a certification system. It's not only about carbon, it's about, let's say, labeling food that is produced in a regenerative way. And that will replace organic in 10 years for sure. Because we will get rid of chemicals in the agricultural sector for sure, because we have better alternatives and there is too much regulation. And we will have alternatives that are better than the chemicals. And then I think it's just a matter of time that we will have the understanding that, well, organic is fine, but it's just a system that tells us what is not been done in a system. But regenerative will just be a system where we have all in, and including nutrient dense food. And that's a long-term view, of course. But I feel that humans will survive somehow only with better soil. And that will be an understanding that is growing, and governments will just be also, let's say, in a way, controlling how people manage land at some point in time. I think there needs to be kind of a consensus that we can't just manage land independently. We have a certain, let's say, obligation if we own land to treat it properly and to be good stewards. And there could be government regulations in place to just making sure to keep away the black sheeps. And often it's only 5% that don't adjust to a new system, and only for the 5% you need to have a regulation system in place.
Thank you, Daniel. We call them the bad apples. So as long as we've got, looks like we're going to have regulation here. Otherwise, we could have a lot more bad apples than we'd like. Daniel, you're an inspiration and a leading force in this. Good luck. It's a really brilliant thing to be doing. You can change. Sounds like you've got lots of fingers and many pies in many different countries. So good luck to you. Thank you so much for your time today. This is a pleasure. Very worthy thing, but it sounds like we're going to have regulation in the carbon trading market. Otherwise, we're going to have problems.
I think that's the reality. Thank you.
Yeah. But thank you for your time and all the best. Thank you, Daniel.
It's great to be here. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks very much for listening, and we hope you stay healthy in the midst of this global pandemic. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, give us a 5-star review, and share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. For more information and takeaways from this episode, please visit forwardfood.tech. See you next time!